Okay, so welcome everyone, and thanks for joining. I know a few people are probably still going to be filtering in, but we can just get started a little bit here. My name is Kathleen Doherty. I am the Senior Conservation Manager for Connecticut Farmland Trust. And I'm also joined today by Kimball Cartwright, who is our development director, and he is also driving the meeting and watching the chat and managing the wait room. So we are recording this and it will be on our YouTube channel if you feel like you want to rewatch it later. And I think with that, let's just get started here. So thanks for joining. Again, my name is Kathleen Doherty. The name of this webinar is Strawberry Fields Forever, How Does CFT Preserve Farmland in Perpetuity? This beautiful photo on the title slide was provided to us by Castle Hill Farm, which, if you were with us last year, they are one of CFT's more recently preserved farms in Newtown. And they provided this photo, but almost all the other photos in this slideshow were taken by me, and they are all farms that have been protected by CFT. Just a lot of really nice farms in Connecticut, as you see in this slideshow. So let's start off. I know people are still joining, but if you want to take a few minutes right now and just type a little bit in the chat, you know, where you're coming from, what's your relation to CFT? Are you a farmer? Are you a CFT partner like maybe Carl? Are you just a CFT supporter generally? Or if you have some other sort of interest or relationship to this webinar, just feel free to type in the chat. You're welcome to also put, you know, where you're calling from. So, you know, to introduce myself a little bit, I've been a staff member with CFT for about 5 years now. My role is conservation and stewardship. If you know CFT, you know, we're a small staff, so we kind of all do everything, but that's sort of my department is conservation and stewardship. And we're also joined by some other staff members today. So just feel free as we go along, you know, enter in the chat. Are you a farmer? Are you a CFT supporter? Are you a partner to CFT in some way? Are you a past board member? Are you someone who lives in a town where farmland has been protected by CFT? Are you just generally interested? And we can kind of collect those answers as we go. And, you know, also feel free to flag in the chat if any questions come up or anything comes up for you as we're talking. So, we are calling this webinar Strawberry Fields Forever. So I just wanted to share this beautiful photo from Bristol's farm in Canton. Again, a preserved farm by CFT. I took this photo at our 50th farm party, which was in 2019. So, you know, if you're in the Canton area, it's a great place to go for pick your own strawberries. And here's an outline of what we'll be talking about today. So part one, we're going to talk about making the case for farmland preservation. And part two will be a brief overview of our two main programs, conservation and stewardship. I see some participation in the chat. Oh, hi, Nancy. I know Flanders well. That's wonderful. And we know Carl, of course, Joan Merrick from the Branford Land Trust. Wonderful. Thanks, Diane. And Florence. That's wonderful. We have all corners of the state represented, it seems like. That's great. Okay, so thanks for sharing, and let's get into it a little bit here. So first off, let's start with making the case for farmland preservation. So, presumably you're all here because you care about farmland. And farms do provide us with a lot of important benefits. The most obvious one, they provide farm products, which can include food and fiber. It can also include forest products. They also provide jobs and economic output. They have some environmental benefits like clean air and water. More and more farmers are also changing their practices to provide climate benefits as well, like carbon sequestration. If you're someone who's concerned about property taxes, you'll be pretty happy to find out that farms pretty consistently contribute more in tax revenue to the town than they use in services. And there's also some intangible benefits as well, right? When you visit a farm or you drive by the farm, you feel a connection to the land. You might reflect on the history of your town. You might feel some kind of connection to the soil. You might just really appreciate the beautiful scenery. So there's just some benefits of farmland that really can't be replaced or replicated. So let's just spend a few minutes appreciating our own unique agricultural situation here in Connecticut. This is a nice photo of a farm we protected in Stonington called Wapitatuck Farm. And if you're in the neighborhood, they do have a great farm stand you can visit. So agriculture in Connecticut, if you think of a number in your head, if you had to guess how much money agriculture contributes to Connecticut's economy, how much would you guess? Well, lucky for us, UConn did a study a few years ago, and they came up with this number in terms of jobs and economic output and just the total impact of Connecticut ag on our state economy. And they estimated between 3.3 and 4.0 billion dollars with a B. So that's a pretty sizable chunk of our state economy is from agriculture. Feel free, if you're feeling participatory, to enter some guesses in the chat about the top crops in Connecticut, with the caveat that there are two or more ways of measuring that number. So in terms of which do you think is the biggest crop in terms of direct sales, and which do you think is the biggest crop in terms of the total acreage of land across the state? So these are two different types of crops that make up these sort of two categories in terms of the number one crop in Connecticut. And I'm going to give it 10 more seconds and then I will tell the answer. It might be surprising and it might not be, depending on which part of the state you farm in, but greenhouse and nursery is the top crop in terms of sales. By the way, if you were wondering, number 2 and number 3, for sales, number 2 is poultry and eggs, and number 3 is dairy. But in terms of acreage, it's always going to be hay, corn, and pasture. And that's not a surprise if you've driven around Connecticut. We have a lot of hay fields, a lot of pasture. A lot of it, most of it is related to the dairy industry. Hay and corn for cows, pasture for cows. So that's a little background about the economic impact of ag in Connecticut. Let's talk about soils here for a minute. So this is a photo of CFT's wonderful soil scientist. His name is Kip Kolsinskis. He's in this photo digging a hole to assess the suitability of the soil for farming. And speaking of soils, did you know that Connecticut has a state soil, just like we have a state tree and a state flower? Technically, it's the unofficial state soil, but it's my personal favorite soil, especially as someone who's living in the Connecticut River Valley. And any guesses? of course, it's going to be Windsor sandy loamy sand, excuse me. Let me skip to here it is. Windsor loamy sand. So these first two photos here are like cross-sectional photos of Windsor loamy sand in the Connecticut River Valley. And then this third photo looks a lot like soil, but it actually is a cake designed to look like soil. So Kip, our soil scientist, is actually a great baker when he's not out there digging holes, and he made this cake to look just like Windsor loamy sand, complete with crushed Oreos and gummy worms. So we like to say it looked like dirt, but it tasted great. Here's a great photo of a tobacco farm we protected a few years ago. Connecticut River Valley, just a lot of Windsor loamy sand in that field. So let's talk a little more about soil. Kip is always telling us it's not dirt, it's soil. And you know, an inch of soil can take hundreds of years to form. It's not just the sand that gets left behind after rocks get eroded. You know, soil really is a living, breathing ecosystem. There's a ton of microorganisms living there, you know, bugs, bacteria, fungi, roots, there's water, air, you know, it's a whole ecosystem. So when you think about what it means then to disturb that soil, you can think of it as if you're cutting down an old growth forest. I mean, it's going to take hundreds and hundreds of years to replenish that soil once it's been removed or disturbed. And needless to say, our farms rely on soil. So this map is from a report called Farms Under Threat. And the name of the report kind of says it all. You know, farmland across the country is threatened by development. You can see all the dark red areas in the New England area, and that is showing the amount of agricultural land that was lost to urban and highly developed uses in this 20-year period, 1992 to 2012. Here's another graphic from that same Farms Under Threat report. This is showing the top 12 most threatened states. Oh, my box moved on me. Well, number 7 is Connecticut. And that's from the whole country in terms of farmland loss and threat to farmland. Connecticut is number 7 in the whole country. Between 2001 and 2016, we lost 23,000 acres of farmland across the whole state of Connecticut. So that's a little bit of the context we're working in. So farmland is a valuable resource in our state, and it's a resource that is highly threatened. So for the remainder of this presentation, we're going to be talking about, well, what can we do about it? What is CFT doing to stem the tide of farmland loss and protect our prime farmland soils? This photo is a dairy farm we protected and that we are about to complete the protection of the remaining acreage. The farmer's name is Byron Gallup in Ballintown. Connecticut Farmland Trust has a mission of preserving Connecticut farmland for farmers. So this photo is a dairy farm, but we protect all types of farms, you know, vegetable farms, dairy, orchards, Christmas tree farms, tobacco land, greenhouses, anything you can think of. Agriculture in Connecticut is really diverse, so we will go where we're needed to preserve farmland. In our history, we've protected over 5,600 acres of land, which equals 73 farms across the entire state. So how do we accomplish this goal of preserving farmland for farmers? So the CFT conservation program basically has a two-pronged approach. So we work to get the land permanently protected, and we also work to help farmers get access to land and ensure that the farm business remains viable. So let's talk about land protection first. The main tool that we use to protect land is called an agricultural conservation easement. CFT was created in 2002, but the agricultural conservation easement actually goes back to the 1970s when the State Farmland Preservation Program was first formed. And an agricultural conservation easement is basically a legal mechanism for ensuring that the land remains in agricultural use permanently. The key thing is that the land remains privately owned. So the farmer or landowner voluntarily puts this restriction on their land to permanently limit the future use of the land so that it can only be used for agricultural and forestry use. What's special about CFT's land protection program and what makes us a little different from some other land trusts in Connecticut is that our land protection program is designed to meet the unique needs of farmers. So if the farmer needs a new barn, we can work with them to do that. Typically, our ag easements will include a farmhouse because we know the farmer needs somewhere to live. So even though the land is permanently restricted, we still want it to remain viable for farming in the long term. That brings us to the second part of our conservation program, which is our focus on land access and farm viability. So there's a huge trend of farmers in Connecticut, as well as across the country, getting older and wanting to retire. So about a third of farmers in Connecticut are 65 years or older. And over 90% of them do not have a younger person under the age of 45 who's working with them. So what is going to happen to those farms when those farmers retire? It's important to have land that's permanently protected, that's available for farming. But if all the farms go out of business because there's nobody to take care of that land, what was the point of all this land protection? You need the farmland and the farmer to work the land in order to really protect those soils in the long term and ensure that the farm remains viable. So we have all these farmers retiring, we have no one to take over for them. And at the same time, there's a huge wave of young farmers who want to get started with farming in Connecticut. They know how to farm, they know how to run a business, all they need is land. But unfortunately, access to land is the #1 barrier for beginner farmers. So this is where CFT comes in again. We are really focused on helping new and beginning farmers get access to land. That's what the Connecticut Farmland program is all about. Our nickname for this program is eFarmany, but instead of matching people for online dating, we are matching young farmers who need land with those older farmers who are retiring and want to transfer their land. So you can find out more about the CT Farmland program at the website ctfarmland.org. It is a website, but it's not just a website. We also have a whole program and staff devoted to providing hands-on support in terms of, helping farmers and landowners meet each other, helping them draft those lease agreements, one-on-one consultations, that type of support services. It's all about, the long-term thinking, making sure that land remains in farming by making sure there's someone available to farm it. I promise this is the last map I'm going to show you today. I know the bright red blobs are getting a little depressing, but I just want to talk a little more about land access and how it relates to affordability. So this map is showing farm real estate values in terms of dollars per acre. And Connecticut has the 4th highest land values for farmland in the entire country. So the top 5 states are Rhode Island, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and then California. So, imagine you're a beginner farmer, you grew up in Connecticut, maybe you went to UConn Aggie, or you came up through a farmer training program in Bridgeport or Hartford. You have your business plan, you're ready to go. Then you try to go buy a piece of farmland and you find out it's $13,200 per acre on average. That doesn't include a house. It doesn't include any of the farm equipment you're going to need. We know everything is expensive in Connecticut as far as housing goes. You know, how can you manage that as a beginner farmer? It's a real challenge. One great outcome of CFT's farmland preservation program is that it makes farmland more affordable. So if the land is restricted for agricultural use, that means, you know, the farmer is not going to have to get into a bidding war with a developer who wants to build condos. You know, the only legal use of that land is farming. So it keeps that price a little lower for the next farmer to be able to buy that piece of property when the time comes. So here's a beautiful shot of White Brothers Farm in Sharon, another CFT protected farm. Let's wrap up by talking about what happens to the farm after it's preserved. This is the other half of CFT's mission, and in some ways I would consider it the most important part of our mission. Not to disparage the other parts of our mission, but this is really the lasting impact of our work. And in land trust lingo, we would call it the stewardship program. So unlike other nonprofits, you know, CFT is designed to stay in business forever. So we're not like the American Cancer Society where, you know, the goal is ultimately to cure cancer and put the American Cancer Society out of business. When we preserve a farm, we are taking on a permanent legal responsibility to steward that farm. We're making a promise to that original landowner that we are always going to be there to enforce that conservation easement. So that's why I would say the stewardship program is the most important part and most lasting part of our mission. Even if, you know, starting today, we never protect another farm, we still have these 73 farms that are already preserved, and we need to stick around and steward those farms in perpetuity. So what do we really mean when we talk about stewardship, and how does CFT steward its farm easements? I would say that our stewardship program is really centered primarily around building relationships with those farmers who own our preserved farms. So we touch base with those farmers every year. We meet with them. We talk about their plans for the property. Sometimes the farmer will come to us and they need our approval to build a new barn or a new structure. So we work with them on that. Sometimes a farmer will express that they're ready to retire, or they don't want to retire, but they have a field they want to lease out. And we work with them to make sure that land stays in production. And if they're ready to have a new farmer come on board to lease or buy the land, we can help them with that too. There are some times when it gets a little more complex than that, and we end up in stewardship situations that, you know, are a little more complex. And there are times when someone tries to use the property in a way that wasn't originally intended. There are times when the conservation easement is violated, or someone is doing something they're not supposed to do. It can get really tricky. You know, we sign this legal document that lasts in perpetuity, and it's basically an agreement like, yes, at some point we probably will get sued, or we will sue someone in order to uphold this permanent legal agreement. But at the end of the day, when we preserve a farm, we're making a promise to that original landowner, and we're making a promise to you, our supporters, that we're going to stick around and steward that farm and uphold the preservation of that farm. So that's really what our stewardship program is based on. CFT is here for the long term, and we're here to keep our promise that the land will be preserved forever. So my goal today was to make the case for farmland preservation and to tell you a little bit about our preservation and stewardship programs. So I hope I've done that. And I just want to give my appreciation and say thanks to everyone for joining me today to hear more about CFT's work. My email address is on this last slide, and I would also encourage you to visit the CFT website to learn more about our programs. You can get on our newsletter list. We have some fun summer events coming up that you will not hear about unless you're on the list. So thanks again. That's the end of my slides, and I would be really happy now to take some questions about anything we talked about today.
And you
Hi.
can ask,
Oh.
Sorry, Kathleen, you can ask questions by either unmuting yourself and asking them, or you can put them in the chat.
Hi, I just unmuted myself, so I'm going to go ahead and just ask this way. I'll put myself on video, but do you have any suggestions? And I'm sorry, I joined late, so if this was answered previously, forgive me. Do you have any suggestions of, I'm interested in, a lot of towns around me have town farms, and I'm just curious about there's a farm in my town that seems to be, has an elderly owner, and I would love to try to make it into a town farm. And is this something that CFT would be, would that fall under this stewardship program? And if you had any suggestions of how to approach this person, and or not necessarily that, but if it would, if this is something that you've seen done and successfully done, anything that you know of regarding this kind of situation.
Yeah, it certainly has been done. And by town farm, you mean a farm that's owned by the town and meant as, a public open space.
Yeah, under the guise of sort of an educational facility, but keeping it as a working farm. But, I think in that regard, you'd have to keep financially it's secure, you'd have to have sort of educational programs that people come in and pay for, maybe have a farmer's market, something like that.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
So there's a great example of Massaro Farm, which is the land is owned by the town. They lease it to a farmer, and the farmer has a CSA and a farm stand on the property, but then they also have public trails. And I don't know that CFT was involved with that, but it's the type of thing that we could help you navigate. Of course, the landowner has to be willing, but there are programs to kind of get that going, and even to partially fund the purchase of the land. So feel free to reach out by email, but yes, there are successful examples of that in Connecticut, and we could help navigate.
Okay, thank you. I will definitely try to reach out once I, put my ducks in a row. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's a great question. There are a lot of, once you get into it, there's a lot of different ways that farmland preservation actually happens. There's state money available, there's federal money available. We've been involved with some very successful private fundraising campaigns around farmland preservation. So, there are programs out there, there are ways to do it, and each town in Connecticut is totally unique, and each landowner's situation is totally unique. So there's usually some type of way forward if it's a worthwhile project. I guess I should check the chat. Oh, do you approach farmers or do they approach you? So to answer that question, I would say it goes both ways, but the program is entirely voluntary. So mostly farmers come to us, but we are trying more and more to put ourselves in front of farmers, and whether it's, making a presentation at the Ag Commission meeting, or getting, personal references from people that are local to that farmer. We are trying to make our presence known, but we don't typically cold call a farmer and say, hey, we have our eyes on your property for preservation. It's totally voluntary that people come to us when they're ready, but we would like to make it known to more farmers that our programs are out there and that they're available, so that they'll feel comfortable calling us. So that's part of the goal of webinars like this one, is to do a little more outreach in that direction. A lot of our newer inquiries from people are personal recommendations. So, someone heard us speak at a conference, or, is personal friends with Elizabeth, or knows someone who knows someone who knows me, and they give our contact number to that farmer and we're able to help them that way. So it's a lot of word of mouth, which is great. All right, I can take a few more questions if you have any. And I'm also happy to answer questions about any of the slides or any of the photos on the slides. Kimball, maybe this is an opportunity for you to plug some of these farm tours, maybe without, you don't have to share more detail than you're ready to share, but just a little teaser maybe.
Indeed, if you don't already follow our social media channels on Facebook and Instagram, feel free to do that, or to sign up on our website. There's a place you can sign up for our e-newsletter. It comes out once a month, and it typically talks about things like we've got 4 small group farm tours coming up this summer. Well, there'll be a couple of other events that we're going to announce, also involving farms, that will happen one in June, one in September. And anytime that we try to do things, those are typically the ways that we have been getting the word out. And of course, I'm going to put my email in the chat if there are ever things that you would like to hear us talk a little bit more about in the e-newsletter. I'm usually very responsive. You'll notice the things coming up in the next issue. So feel free to be in touch with me that way as well.
Yeah, one of the farm tours will be to see this beautiful cow that's on the slide, who lives in the lap of luxury at Cato Corner Farm in Colchester. That's a farm we protected several years ago at this point, and these farms just truly are living the dream out there in the pasture, and great cheese as well from Cato Corner. So if there are no more questions, feel free to reach out after the webinar if anything occurs to you, and also feel free to reach out with, by email if there's anything else you want to know about CFT and our programs. But I think maybe we can let you get back to your days. But I thank everyone for making time to be here today, and hopefully we'll hear from some of you after the fact. Nice to see you there, Carl. So
Nice job, Kathleen. Appreciate it.
as Kimball would say, we'll bless and release.
Have a great day.